My name is Michael Ramirez. I'm 49 years old and I died for 11 minutes. What Jesus showed me changed everything I know. Before that morning, I want you to understand who I was before all of this happened, because I think it matters. I wasn't some stranger to church. I grew up in church. My mother sang in the choir for 31 years at a Baptist congregation in San Antonio. I'd heard the gospel my whole life. I knew the verses. I could quote Romans 8:28 in my sleep. I served on the usher board for 6 years. I handed out bulletins, pointed people to their seats, took up the offering. From the outside, I looked like a solid church-going man. But here is what was really happening inside the walls of that church, inside the conversations after Sunday service, inside the fellowship hall where people gathered over potato salad and sweet tea. There was gossip. There was a river of it, and I was standing in it up to my neck. Not because I was some uniquely wicked person. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't a monster. I was just ordinary. I was just doing what people around me did, and nobody told me it was a problem. Nobody connected it to the condition of the soul. My wife, Sandra, God bless her, she worked in the church office 3 days a week. She knew everything that went on, who was struggling in their marriage, who had financial problems, who had a teenager in trouble, who the pastor had counseled privately. And that information would come home with her, and we would talk about it over dinner, like it was news, like it was entertainment. I would call my buddy Leon on Saturday mornings and we would run through everything that had happened that week at the church. Our dissecting people's lives, offering our opinions on their choices, speculating on things we had no business speculating about. That was my life. A man who sat in the house of God every Sunday, but spent the rest of the week tearing down the very people he sat beside in the pew. And I did not see anything wrong with it. Not once. Not a single time did I stop and feel convicted. I thought of it as just being part of the community, knowing people, being informed, being involved. The morning everything stopped, it was a Tuesday in October, about 8 months ago. I worked in facilities maintenance for a school district, hard physical work. I'm not a small man. I played football in high school. I've always been active. I thought I was in decent shape. That morning I was moving some heavy equipment in a storage building, and I felt something strange in my chest. Not exactly pain at first, more like pressure, like someone had placed a heavy book on my sternum and left it there. I ignored it. I'm a man. That is what we do. I kept working. Within about 20 minutes, I was on the floor. My coworker Darnell found me unresponsive. He called 911 and started CPR immediately. I owed Darnell my life, and I told him that the first chance I got. The paramedics worked on me in that building, and they worked on me in the ambulance. By the time I arrived at the hospital, I had been clinically dead for 11 minutes. Now I didn't experience those 11 minutes as blackness. I didn't experience them as sleep. I want to say that plainly before I tell you what happened, because some people assume that near-death experiences are just the brain misfiring, just chemicals releasing as the body shuts down. I am not here to argue with anyone's science. What I am here to tell you is what I experienced. And what I experienced was more real than anything I have ever touched, seen, smelled, or heard in this life. More real than this floor I'm standing on. The Hall of Voices, the first thing I became aware of was sound. Not music exactly, but something like music, something underneath music, like the frequency that music comes from. And then I was somewhere. I don't know another way to say it. I was just somewhere. It was not dark. It was not blindingly bright. It was like being inside a kind of warm, clear light that didn't have a source. It just was everywhere at once. And then I saw faces, dozens of them, saw maybe more. They were people I recognized, not all of them, but some, and they were not looking at me with warmth. They were looking at me with something I can only describe as deep, aching grief. Not anger, not accusation, grief. Like they were watching something being destroyed that they had hoped would be saved. I didn't understand at first. And then the sound changed. The sound became voices, and the voices were words, and the words were mine. Every single word I had ever spoken about another person, every whispered conversation in the fellowship hall, every phone call with Leon on Saturday morning, every dinner table commentary about someone else's private pain. I could hear them all at once, like a choir of my own worst moments. And the people whose faces I could see were the people whose names had been in those words. I felt something I had never felt before in my life. Not guilt exactly, deeper than guilt. It was as if I suddenly understood, all at once and without confusion, that words are not small. That words spoken about a person do not disappear when the conversation ends. That they travel, that they land somewhere, that they plant something in the soil of whoever hears them. And I had been planting weeds in the garden of God's people for years and calling it fellowship. Standing before him, then the faces faded, and I was standing, and I mean standing. I had weight, I had presence, I was fully myself. I was standing before a light that I knew. I did not see a figure the way some people describe. What I saw was presence. What I felt was a knowing that went through me the way sunlight goes through glass. And I knew it was Jesus. I don't know how to explain that certainty except to say that when you are before him, there is no question. All the questions you ever had dissolve. It's like asking whether you know your own name. He spoke to me. Not in audible sound the way I'm speaking to you now. It was more like he poured his words into me, and they became part of my understanding. And the first thing he showed me, not said, showed me like a vision within the experience, was the church. My church. The building where I had spent years. And it was beautiful on the outside, and it was full of people on the inside, and the people were singing and the pastor was preaching and everything looked right. But above it, in the spirit, I don't have better language for this. Above it was a kind of darkness, like storm clouds gathered over a house while the people inside don't know the weather is turning. And he let me understand what that darkness was. The tongue is a fire. You have known this scripture, you have read it, but you have not believed it. You treated my people's wounds as conversation. You dressed their sorrow as entertainment. Every secret shared without love is a stone thrown at the image of God. That's what he said to me. Not in anger. I want you to understand that. There was no wrath in it. There was love in it. The kind of love that is so serious about you that it will not let you stay comfortable in your destruction. It was the love of a father who has watched his child walk toward danger and can no longer stay silent. What gossip actually, he showed me something I had never considered. He showed me that when we gossip about someone inside the church, we are not just being careless with information. We are participating in an assault on a person that God made in his own image. We are taking the private places of a human being, the places they are still being formed, still being healed, still being worked on by the Holy Spirit, and we are dragging those places into the light before God is finished. He showed me a man whose name I will not say, a man from my own church whose struggles had been the subject of many of my Saturday morning phone calls with Leon, a man who was fighting addiction quietly, who was trying to hold his family together, who was on his knees every night asking God for the strength to make it one more day. And I had talked about that man as though his pain was a story I had the right to tell, as though his private war was my public content. And the Lord showed me what that man carried every time he walked into the church afterward, how he could feel it, not know it consciously maybe, but feel in his spirit that something had shifted in how people looked at him, how the warmth had a slight chill behind it now, how the handshakes were a fraction shorter, how the conversations steered around certain topics in ways that told him he had been discussed. And every time he felt that, a small part of his courage to keep fighting, to keep coming, to keep believing that the church was a place of safety, that part died a little. You weakened a soldier in my army. You did not strike him with your hands, you struck him with your mouth. The wound is the same. I wept. And I don't mean I felt emotional. I mean something in me broke open that I didn't know could break. Because in that place there was no defense. You can't explain yourself before a God who already knows everything. You can't say you meant well. You can't say everyone else was doing it. You can't say it wasn't that serious. In his presence, everything is exactly as serious as it actually is. The difference between a church and a hospital. Then he showed me something else. He showed me what the church is supposed to be. And I'm going to try to describe this because it is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. and I have been trying to live inside the memory of it every single day since I came back. He showed me a community of people. It looked like a church, felt like a church. But what hung over it was not darkness. It was lit from within. And the people inside were different, not because they were perfect, not because they had no sin and no struggle, but because when someone fell, the others gathered around them in silence. When someone's private pain became known, it went no further than the ears it was meant for and the knees of the people who would pray. When someone was broken, they were held, not discussed. And he said to me something I will carry to my grave and beyond. The church is not a courtroom, it is a hospital. And I did not call you to be a reporter of wounds. I called you to be a healer of them. That sentence reorganized me. It reorganized everything I thought I understood about what it means to be part of a congregation. I had been treating God's hospital like a news station. I had been broadcasting triage from the emergency room, and people who needed to feel safe enough to come in and get help were staying in the parking lot because of men like me. He sent me back. I don't know how long I was in that place. In clock time, it was 11 minutes. In my experience, it was a lifetime. Before he sent me back, he showed me one final thing. And I believe this is the reason I am standing here today, telling this story instead of keeping it to myself. He showed me a ripple, like a stone dropped in still water. And he showed me that one man changing the way he used his tongue in one congregation, in one town, could change the water for hundreds of people over decades. That the ripple of a redeemed mouth goes further than anyone imagines. That if I came back and lived differently, if I used my voice to cover people instead of expose them, to build instead of tear down, to pray instead of gossip, the effect on God's kingdom would be real and measurable in eternity, even if I never saw it with my own eyes. Go back. Guard their names the way you would want your name guarded. Speak of my people the way I speak of them, with their healing in mind, not their history on display. And then I was back. I came to on a hospital table with a team of doctors and nurses staring down at me and Sandra, standing in the doorway with her hands over her mouth. And the first thing I said when I could speak, and the nurses told me this because I don't remember saying it, the first thing I said was, "Tell Leon I'm sorry." Nobody in that room knew what that meant, but I did. What changed? When I came home, I spent 4 days in the hospital. I spent those 4 days in silence mostly, except for talking with Sandra and praying. When I came home and got strong enough, the first thing I did was call Leon and tell him what happened. Every detail. I told him that I believed God had shown me that our Saturday morning conversations were not fellowship. They were something else, something that looked like connection, but was actually harm. And Leon, God bless him, he cried. He didn't argue with me. He said he'd felt for a long time that something was off, but hadn't known how to name it. We don't have those conversations anymore. Not because I cut Leon off. He's still one of my closest friends. But the content changed. We pray together on Saturday mornings now. We talk about what God is doing in our own lives, our own marriages, our own struggles. We talk about how to be better men, better fathers, better members of our church. And those conversations leave us full instead of empty, which tells me everything I need to know about which kind God approves. I talked to Sandra too. I asked her forgiveness for the years of dinner table gossip, for taking what she carried in confidence from that church office and turning it into our private commentary. She heard me, she forgave me, and she made her own changes in how she handled information. Not because I pressured her, but because when you tell someone what you saw on the other side of death, people tend to take it seriously. I went to our pastor and told him everything, not to confess publicly or cause a scene, but because I felt I owed him the truth about what had been happening and I wanted accountability going forward. He was gracious. He prayed with me. He told me that what I had described was not unusual, not the near-death experience specifically, but the pattern, the way gossip runs through congregations like a low-grade fever that everyone has gotten so used to, they stop calling it sickness. What I want to leave with you, I am not standing here to make anyone feel condemned. Condemnation is not what brought me back. What brought me back was mercy, and I want to be a vessel of mercy when I tell you this. Not a vessel of judgment, but I also cannot soften what I was shown to the point where it loses its power to change things. And so I'm going to say it plainly. If you are sitting in a church and you know things about people, real things, private things, things that were shared in trust or overheard or came through the grapevine, and you are passing those things along, you are not participating in community. You are participating in destruction. You may not feel it that way. I didn't feel it that way for years. But feelings are not the final measure of reality. And in the place where I stood before Jesus, reality was the only thing that existed. He takes seriously what we do with each other's dignity. He takes seriously the way we speak about people he died for. Every person whose name you have ever repeated in a careless whisper was someone Jesus bled for. The addict in your congregation whose story got passed around over coffee, Jesus died for him. The couple whose marriage problems became Sunday lunch conversation, he died for them too. And when we treat their pain as public property, we are, in a very real and spiritual sense, spitting on the cross that covered them. I know that is strong language. I'm not a preacher. I'm a facilities maintenance worker from San Antonio who died for 11 minutes on a Tuesday in October and came back with something I can't keep quiet about. This is not my theology. This is my testimony. I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. And I am responsible before God to tell it. The mouth God can use. There is one more thing. When he showed me the image of the church that was healthy, the one lit from within, I noticed something about the people in it. They talked constantly. They were not a silent congregation. They were not a people who had locked up their tongues and become robots. They laughed. They talked over each other with excitement. They were full of conversation. But the conversation was different. What they were talking about was what God was doing in their own lives, in the lives of the people around them, in the world. They were talking about each other's victories. They were carrying each other's burdens in prayer instead of spreading them in gossip. When something hard happened to one of them, the response was not the phone call, it was the prayer meeting. The information went up before it went out. That is the picture he left me with. On a people who love each other enough to guard each other, who understand that the mouth is not a neutral instrument, that it is either a weapon or a tool of healing, and the difference lies in who you are serving when you open it, yourself and your need for connection and entertainment, or the person whose name is about to cross your lips. I came back from death to tell you that your words about God's people matter in eternity, that the church gossip you've been swimming in for years is not harmless, that the Lord is watching what we do with each other's dignity, and that he is still in the business of mercy, merciful enough to send a facilities maintenance worker from San Antonio back from 11 minutes of death to stand in front of a room full of people and say, guard their names, cover their wounds, not use your mouth for healing. That's all he asked me to do. And by the grace of God, that is what I intend to spend the rest of my life doing. Thank you.